Are we alone in the universe? And where do we actually come from? I think we are all here in order to explore the universe.
Welcome to Radio Davos, the podcast from the World Economic Forum that looks at the biggest challenges and how we might solve them. This week, we venture into space to look for life on Mars.
These are incredible worlds that we can see at night in the night sky, and that we can go visit with our robotic emissaries today and potentially in the future with humans.
Yes, humans are planning to build a permanent settlement on the moon and could feasibly land on Mars in the next decade. We speak to the chief economist at NASA.
We have begun the process of building habitable infrastructure around another world other than Earth.
And this astrobiologist, yes, that is a thing, says why she is excited about the search for ET.
We are looking for life as we know it.
And the head of space technology at the World Economic Forum explains what all of this might mean for those of us still with our feet firmly on planet Earth.
And the exciting story now is that these benefits are really increasing in what it really deliver for us on Earth. And I think this is really going to have a profound impact for all of us on the ground.
Find Radio Davos wherever you get your podcasts or visit wef.ch/podcasts, where you'll also find our sister programs Meet the Leader and Agenda Dialogues. I'm Robin Pomeroy at the World Economic Forum, and with this leap into space,
Such a monumental event for everybody on planet Earth.
This is Radio Davos. Welcome to Radio Davos. This week we're talking space, and I have a co-host from the World Economic Forum, Nikolai Khlystov. Nikolai, how are you doing?
Great to be here, Robin, and excited to have this conversation.
Why space particularly? Why is that of interest to the World Economic Forum?
Well, you can really look at space as just an extension of our Earth activities, really. I mean, of course, a lot of it is focused on science and exploration, but increasingly we're looking at what different industries can do in space. Now, that's still in the years to come, but today there are tremendous benefits through space data, through different space data that we get from satellites, thousands of satellites that are in orbit. Now, this data can come in the form of Earth observation, imagery, and we're getting into different types of wavelengths and what we can see, and that's valuable for industries, but that's also valuable for societal issues and disaster response and weather monitoring, but also monitoring how the atmosphere is changing. There is also, of course, the whole question of connectivity, with a number of constellations now providing many satellites providing essentially internet connectivity from space to locations perhaps that don't have access to terrestrial internet. So this is incredibly powerful if you think about remote locations, connecting them to the internet. And of course, there is the technology of global positioning navigation, which provides this signal that tells you where you are on the road or how do you get to your next destination. So this is incredibly important and actually underpins a lot of economic activity on the ground.
We're going to be talking to two experts you convened at a recent World Economic Forum event, several space experts from different sectors, from government agencies, space agencies, from industry, academics. I mean, what is the benefit of bringing those people together? How do they spark off each other? What do you get from the meetings like that?
Well, it's a great question, Robin. It's fascinating to be in these meetings, right? This is essentially what the forum does. And this is why I think we're quite unique in this role. We bring together really the top experts from industry, but also from the governments that are really doing the most progressive work or really pushing the boundaries of policy and regulations, but also civil society. So whether these are experts, top experts from around the world, from academia, from different think tanks, different intergovernmental organizations, UN, when you bring them together and you put them in a small physical space, right, and you start going at some questions, there are fascinating ideas that come up, right, and sometimes they bounce off each other, and there are things that come up that perhaps they haven't thought about on their own before. And this is really how the magic happens in many forum environments, not just when it comes to space.
And you've mentioned the work of the forum is important in harnessing the benefits of all these changes and all this progress that's happening in space, harnessing the benefits of that for people on Earth. I mean, what kind of benefits are you thinking of, or what are you doing that may help harness the benefits.
The exciting story now is that these benefits are really increasing in what they really deliver for us on Earth. So Earth observation is one. The technology that comes with Earth observation satellites, essentially satellites looking down at our planet and being able to capture more and more detail, more and more change when it comes to nature, when it comes to our oceans, when it comes to the environment, the physical environment, essentially. Those capabilities are getting better and better. So, for example, we can monitor now different methane leaks. And actually, in a lot of cases, those leaks are unknown even to the actors responsible for them. So actually even just saying, hey, look, you have a problem there. Can you address that? I mean, that's a hugely important capability. That's just one specific example, that extends to monitoring moisture levels, flooding, being able to understand which areas are cut off. So there's a lot of that Earth observation satellites can do. They can also monitor shipping traffic and illegal fishing and optimize routes when it comes to moving goods around the world. So that's one capability. The other one is on connectivity and being able to, again, provide that signal to locations that perhaps have never had that signal before and able to connect those communities in remote locations.
Some of those things that might not happen anyway if you took the World Economic Forum out of the picture, if you had less of this cooperation and meeting of minds. Do you think that there would be a risk that some of those things might be neglected or not used to their full extent?
Where we've seen really impact from some of these convenings that we organize and we bring stakeholders together and sometimes publish those outcomes in the form of white papers, have to do with helping accelerate some of that change, helping pull in the actors that otherwise perhaps were just on the sidelines and are maybe just following the conversation, but they haven't really fully immersed into it, right? And so helping accelerate some of the change, inform some of those decision makers that otherwise may not be moving as fast, right? And maybe not be paying as much attention as they could have been. I think this is really exciting, particularly when it comes to some of these developments in the acceleration and benefits of space data.
Well, as I said, we have 2 interviews on this episode. Later on, we're talking to someone who's looking for life beyond Earth. Real fundamental question. So interesting to hear someone who's seriously doing that for those of us who aren't into this. I'm not sure we were aware that work was even going on. But first, we're going to talk to someone. It's a job I didn't know existed. NASA, the American space agency everyone knows, but it has a chief economist. Could you tell us something about Alex, please?
Both of those conversations are absolutely fascinating. We, of course, at the forum do not look at those topics directly, but both brilliant individuals and professionals. They're both members of our Global Future Council on Space. But Alexander, obviously, as you said, chief economist of NASA, really looks at how do we make some of this activity, space activity, competitive? How does NASA work with the commercial sector? This is really the big change that has happened over the last 10 years or so in ways that NASA works with private sector. How does it outsource in a way some of its activities in a way that it makes it maybe more efficient, but also allows NASA to focus on some of these other bigger and grander goals, I would say.
One of those big missions that NASA is concentrating on is developing the moon. Well, let's go to the horse's mouth and hear the chief economist of NASA. This is Alexander MacDonald.
I'm Alex McDonald. I'm the NASA chief economist.
Why does NASA have a chief economist?
Well, as the first NASA chief economist, it's been an interesting journey. NASA didn't obviously start with economics as one of its kind of core leadership positions. But as we've begun working more and more with the private sector, it's become important to conduct economic due diligence of companies. And it's also become important to think about how NASA plays a role in the expanding commercial ecosystem, the expanding space economy. NASA is a mission-focused agency for exploration, planetary science, and also aeronautics. And there are economic elements of all of those areas that impact national growth, that impact the global economy. And so as the space economy has grown, NASA's role within the space economy has become something that it's more interested in understanding. And it's been fun to work with the agency to help them figure it out.
I suppose the private sector's always been involved with NASA. Yeah. When you look back on the moon landings and the I don't know what the figure is for the number of people who are involved in that.
Hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands, and hundreds or maybe thousands of companies involved in contributing towards that. Run by NASA, the mission, the Apollo missions, which is a government-funded, non-profit kind of body. But there's been a change, hasn't there, in recent years that's been quite noticeable, I think, by the general public. Can you just talk us through kind of what that transformation is and where it's going?
As you mentioned, the Apollo program involved a lot of different contractors, but they were really doing work to the specific requirements of NASA, and they would then transfer that hardware to the US government for the US government's exclusive use. And around the mid-2000s, there was an understanding that there are potential commercial markets. By the mid-2000s, there was already, for example, an international commercial launch market. Rockets would be launching commercial satellites to geosynchronous orbit for commercial communication satellite purposes. And at the time, the US had actually basically not had a competitive position. There were no US commercial launches. The market was mostly dominated by other firms from other countries. And there was an understanding that the types of rockets that NASA needs to deliver cargo to the International Space Station are also the types of rockets that could compete in the international commercial launch market. And so a program called the Commercial Orbital Transportation Systems Program, COTS, began, gave about $500 million to a couple of companies, one of which was SpaceX. And that created a different model because this was not transferring these rockets over to NASA. This was first giving funds directly for the development of these systems to commercial companies. And then after COTS, there was the Commercial Resupply Services Program that purchased services of the delivery of cargo to the International Space Station. And that meant that the companies owned the hardware and were then free to sell the services of that hardware to other interested parties, including commercial launches. And that began NASA's shift to leveraging the commercial sector for space exploration activities. Today, we're actually even leveraging commercial services contracts for our return to the moon. And this has taken advantage of significant investments in space by venture capital, by the private sector. We're now seeing regularly close to $10 billion a year, roughly, of venture capital and private equity investments in the space sector, which is a significant increase from where we were, say, 20 years ago. And much of that is due to NASA's shift in the strategy. So we're putting more money into the overall sector by taking the strategy on. And we're also having more of a portfolio approach. Rather than having kind of one company that will be doing these different types of missions, we'll often have multiple companies. And this creates a resilience and robustness in both the kind of space economy overall, but also in NASA's missions.
Has it changed the way space is viewed by the general public, do you think? In what way?
I certainly think it's brought a lot of excitement back. Certainly, private companies are able to take risks that maybe a government agency can't always directly take themselves. And so we're seeing a massive increase in capabilities, reusable rocketry being the most obvious one. Seeing rockets launch into orbit and then return to the pad is something that we did not have 20 years ago. Today it happens, 100 times a year. That is a significant change in the visibility of space, in the pace of innovation of space. And I think the public sees that. I also think the public sees that there are more and more people going to space from different countries and different walks of life. You don't have to be an astronaut to go to space anymore. And so we're seeing a lot more people go into space as customers. And we're seeing a lot more countries go into space than ever before. And so I think that's increasing the visibility of the sector overall, and certainly the kind of dramatic achievements that we're seeing, like large rockets being captured by chopsticks, is gaining some attention.
People who aren't fascinated by those images, like the one you just mentioned, and just kind of the romance and the glamour of space, would say, why are we spending all that money up there? How is it helping me? What do you say to them?
Well, first off, no money is spent in space. All of the money is spent terrestrially, results in jobs on Earth. But what else do we get from space? Well, Space overall today is roughly kind of a $500 billion plus economic sector. And the majority of that is communications. Increasingly, you get your internet from space. You certainly, if you have satellite television, get your television from space. Perhaps the most important contribution to the global economy comes from our global positioning satellite system, which is how you often navigate city, get a rideshare app. It's how we do timing for our financial systems. Much of the modern world runs off of the GPS system. And that's because we have systems in space that provide that positional information to people on Earth. And then, of course, our understanding of climate change fundamentally comes from having satellites in orbit around the Earth, looking at Earth and measuring the changing planet, measuring the changing climate. And increasingly, it's even being used in potential mitigation applications. So in addition to the fundamental Earth science that satellites are able to support and have allowed us to understand the types of changes that are happening, now satellites are being developed that can actually observe point source greenhouse gas emissions of methane, which is potentially the solution for a global accountability system. There's a lot of ways in which space technology fundamentally supports our quality of life on Earth. And that comes from kind of an ambition to go and explore the stars. And so I think all of these things are tied. We have the kind of quality of life in modern technological economy in part because of the ambition of spaceflight.
And the private sector is more and more interested, as you mentioned. Can we talk a little bit about what the successor to the International Space Station, that kind of laboratory in space, is seen as this wonderful collaboration of countries to further human knowledge, but it's going to be retiring. What will replace it from NASA's point of view?
Yeah, so the International Space Station, I think, is really one of the greatest engineering achievements of the late 20th century and the early 21st century. It's an international collaboration. We've now been living in space continuously on the ISS for well over 20 years. That's an incredible achievement. At the same time, it's an expensive system to maintain. And as NASA is shifting its resources to taking humans back to the moon, we want to reduce the amount of expenditure that we're making for human spaceflight in low Earth orbit. And so as part of that, we're looking to buy services from new commercial modules. And so we're starting up a program called the Commercial Low Earth Orbit Destinations Program. And this is providing funding to different companies to design and build commercial space stations from which NASA can in the future buy services for its astronauts to go up and do research, prepare for longer exploration missions. And so this is a similar type of partnership to what we have with commercial crew delivery and commercial cargo delivery to the International Space Station today. But in the future, the space station would also be a commercial enterprise. Could still be an international commercial enterprise. And in fact, many of the companies who are developing potential solutions to this are partnering internationally. So I think it'll be different, but it'll also be very similar. It's still going to be an international enterprise, and we're still going to be doing really fascinating research into human spaceflight exploration capabilities and fundamental research for microgravity.
So in theory, we don't know yet, I guess, but there could be lots of little international or the space stations up there where astronauts can go up or the experiments can take place. It won't just be one in the future.
This is one of the great economic questions, which is how much demand is there for how many different commercial space stations? And to your point, we don't know. There's really only one way to find out, which is to have different products go to the market and see how much demand there is. But certainly NASA recognizes that we have a need for enough low Earth orbit human spaceflight activity for at least one commercial space station, and suspect there might be the potential for more.
As an economist, I suppose competition is interesting. If there's lots of entities competing in a market, prices might come down or new innovations might be created because people are rushing against each other. It's funny that the space race used to be a competition between the United States and the USSR, which isn't really the case anymore. Now you've perhaps got rivalries, maybe healthy rivalries, let's hope, between private companies. I mean, how do you see, there must be pros and cons to the way things are going in terms of healthy competition, but also spiky rivalry sometimes. I'm talking about between companies, but also between countries. Is that something that you ever think about?
Certainly, we rely on multiple providers competing to secure NASA contracts in the future in many of our most recent program developments. When we started on the path of developing commercial crew capabilities, it was through choosing two companies to provide commercial crew transportation at the International Space Station. And in addition to the competitive effects potentially kind of keeping prices down, it also provides critical resiliency. As we saw recently, when we were able to launch our astronauts to the space station in one commercial vehicle and then return them in a different commercial vehicle. That provides safety, which fundamentally is our number one priority when it comes to human spaceflight. And so we've started to apply a kind of a competition model within a number of our programs. Commercial lunar payload services as well has a number of different companies who are all competing to win contracts to deliver NASA science payloads to the moon. And we're finding that it's quite effective. I would say it's probably more important to have competition from a resilience perspective and a robustness perspective in a program than necessarily from a price perspective, because overall, sometimes these markets really still only have a few customers.
You mentioned earlier that NASA plans to send people back to the moon. Not been there since when?
1972.
1972. Back then, it was partly this kind of national pride thing, was it? Let's get to the moon and show the world. We've kind of, humanity's done it. I wonder why we're going back. And certainly from an economic point of view, what are the benefits of it?
The Artemis Program, which is NASA's program to return to the moon, is one of my favorites, and one that I've been intimately involved with. And what's so interesting to me about the Artemis Program is that even though it has the same kind of objective of taking humans to the moon, it has the broader objective of learning to stay and work there for extended periods of time. And the way in which we're conducting that program is fundamentally different than the Apollo program. First, we are partnering internationally. On the very first crewed mission that is scheduled to go around the moon, Artemis 2, there is an international astronaut on that mission, a Canadian. NASA and the US government have also committed to landing Japanese astronauts on the lunar surface in exchange for Japan's contribution of a pressurized lunar rover that the crew can live in and work in as it traverses the lunar environment. So right there, we have an international element to the Artemis program that simply wasn't there in Apollo. Over 40 countries have signed the Artemis Accords, which is a commitment to utilize the lunar surface sustainably for peaceful purposes, for economic gain. And that number keeps growing because more and more countries want to be part of the technological and economic enterprise that returning to the moon really is. And we are, of course, also encouraging significant amounts of commercial investment. We are committed to using vehicles that are commercially provided to implement our lunar activities, both robotically and with crew. And so, again, that is very, very different than the Apollo program. We've procured services from two different commercial human lander systems. There's not one LEM. In this case, there would be a couple. And finally, if that isn't all enough, we also have the Gateway, which is our first commitment to a human habitable outpost that will permanently circle the moon. We have begun the process of building habitable infrastructure around another world other than Earth. And that is all part of the Artemis program. And that's a much more significant commitment to the long-term exploration and development of the moon than we've ever had before.
Again, for space enthusiasts, that sounds amazing. But for skeptics, they'll say, well, why would we want to do that? Why do you want to kind of colonize the moon? And people talk about colonizing Mars. Surely we should be concentrating on what's going on the planet Earth with all the resources it has and that we are damaging. How do you respond to that when it comes to the moon mission?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of the above are possible. The total expenditure on the return to the moon per year at NASA is really only on the order of about $8 billion a year, which is really not all that much when you look at it in the context of the global economy. And from that, you get an incredible amount of innovation. If we were not investing in the original return to the moon, we would not have had the semiconductor revolution that we have enjoyed. Even though the semiconductors were invented outside of NASA, in the early 60s, NASA rockets and other rockets were 75% of all global demand for semiconductors. That allowed the whole industry to scale at a much more rapid pace. So fundamentally, investments in things like going to the moon are investments in advancing very complicated and sophisticated technology. And as we know, the vast majority of economic growth in the 20th century came from advances in technology, came from productivity improvements. So space is one of the ways in which governments around the world seek that productivity improvement and channel it through mission-focused investments like going to space.
What's the one thing people misunderstand about space? What's the annoying question you get all the time?
Well, I mean, there's certainly a few of those. But I would say that there is I think a lack of appreciation for how fundamentally our life is enabled by space. Your smartphone works the way it works because it has a GPS-enabled chip that connects to a system of satellites that are orbiting the Earth. If you get satellite TV that is coming from a satellite that is 36,000 kilometers away out in space, that is beaming that transmission to your dish. For me, these are incredible, marvelous engineering achievements. But I think one of the things that I wish people kind of appreciated more was that we don't have these economic benefits simply because people, recognized early on that they wanted to build these things. We have these because people dream of incredible explorations and things like going to the moon Europa around the planet Jupiter, that because we have sent probes there before, we think has an entire ocean underneath a cap of ice that has more water than all of the world's oceans put together. That is incredible. We're sending another mission to the moon Titan, which is a moon of the planet Saturn, and it has lakes, but the lakes are not water. The lakes are pure methane. These are incredible worlds that we can see at night in the night sky, and that we can go visit with our robotic emissaries today and potentially in the future with humans. For me, I just think that is kind of one of the most beautiful and fascinating things about our particular location and time in the cosmos, and just wish maybe some more people appreciate that.
That was Alexander MacDonald, who's a chief economist at NASA, getting quite romantic at the end of that interview about the beautiful cosmos which we can gaze out onto. Did you get kind of poetic like that?
I get poetic. I get sometimes a little bit teary-eyed myself. It's quite incredible. I think whenever we as humanity go back to the lunar surface, I think the exciting thing is this time will be with high definition cameras probably. And everybody will be able to see the incredible images that astronauts will be seeing themselves probably. And I think this is really going to have a profound impact for all of us on the ground. The Apollo missions half a century ago were inspirational for so many people. I think, every time I talk to somebody in the sector, a lot of times they reference seeing those images on TV and those images inspiring them to go into the sector. So I think this is going to be really a pivotal moment. Space is such an inspirational force. I think this is really very exciting and hopefully motivate a lot of folks to study more of some of these key STEM fields: engineering, mathematics, technology, sciences.
Well, that's a topic that's taken up by our second interviewee, Pascale Ehrenfreund, who is president of the Committee on Space Research, COSPA. She is, as we will hear, looking for extraterrestrial life on Mars initially, and then beyond. This is Pascale Ehrenfreund.
I'm Pascale Ehrenfreund. I'm an astrophysicist by training, and I'm currently the president of the Committee of Space Research, COSPA.
You have degrees in astronomy and biology. It's surprising. I mean, where do the two things meet?
Well, actually, I could not really decide. And so I started with a master in molecular biology. And then there have been very large molecules detected, carbon-based molecules detected in space. And I actually made my PhD. I went to France, to Paris, to work on this topic of large carbon molecules in the interstellar medium. And so I had more or less an interdisciplinary education already a long, long time ago.
I mean, biology is the study of life,
yes.
I suppose. And the big question is there life beyond Earth?
I think this is a question which is very fundamental and addresses or concerns us all. Are we alone in the universe? And obviously, we want to understand how life originated on Earth. Is there life in our solar system? Is there life beyond our solar system? So there are many different research topics which are combined in the field of astrobiology. And so for my education, after I made my PhD, very soon the NASA Astrobiology Institute was formed, where scientists from physics, astronomy, meteorology, paleontology, chemistry, biologists work together in an interdisciplinary setting in order to answer all those questions about our origins and eventually also life in the universe. And this is very inspiring because you work with scientists from all different backgrounds.
And how would we detect life, either life now or life maybe millions of years ago that left traces of itself?
Yeah, so it is clear that we are looking for life as we know it. This means carbon-based life. And we build instruments, and those instruments are derivatives from instruments which we have in our laboratories. We send them into space on space missions in order to try to detect, for instance, the basic components of life, like for instance, amino acids or special hydrocarbons. And it is very, very complex, actually. You have to make those instruments space ready. That takes many years. And you have to fly on a mission. And we have a lot of orbiters, landers, and rovers in the last decades, which really looked at very interesting sources such as Mars. And tried, to define habitability or water on those objects. And we are now more or less ready in order really to bring those instruments, to interesting places. It's not only Mars, also in the outer solar system. There are fascinating moons of Jupiter and Saturn, which we want to investigate. And we are bringing those instruments and we are hoping to detect biomolecules and traces or remnant life, which probably has once formed. And I think one thing which is also important to say is that we have not only sources in our solar system, but we have now detected more than 5,000 exoplanets, so planets which are outside our solar system. And we look into the atmospheres, we try to investigate, their evolution and also find out, is there life even beyond?
I wonder what the difference is between what you can detect by looking at something far away from here or from a space telescope and actually sending a robot to land on, because there is one on Mars now, right? I mean, could you tell us the difference between those two things? Because
Yes.
we haven't sent any rovers beyond the solar system. Yeah. What are the signals we can get from there that might indicate life?
It's actually a really very, very valid and very good question. We can, for instance, go every 26 to Mars. The constellation is so that we can launch and come in a period of 7 to 8 months to the surface of Mars. And there are many, many rovers and orbiters and landers also on Mars right now, which are very, very active. And obviously, you can bring quite good instruments which are surveying, habitability and look at the minerals, try to find organic molecules, look at the water history, and in general the whole context and surveying, the environment. And when we are looking into the atmospheres or in the stellar system of exoplanets, we can get valuable information because astronomical observations, you can do them very frequently, much more than, you can send missions into the solar system. But obviously you get signatures and you are not there and you cannot 100% identify a life as such. However, one thing which is really important is we have technologies to bring samples back to Earth. We have done that from asteroids several times. The United States, Japan has done it twice. And we are bringing those samples back in Earth laboratories where we have high resolution instrumentations, and then we can really investigate what we find. And there is a mission in the planning, the Mars Sample Return mission, since quite a long time, but really very much in the planning in an international consortium, NASA and ESA and others. And if we bring back samples from Mars to Earth laboratories, I think we will have fantastic results and understand much more and find eventually organic molecules or remnant of life, if life ever originated on Mars.
I was watching an interview with you about the Perseverance, what do you call it, the rover, on Mars, and someone was asking you, there have been samples taken which could actually indicate there was once life there. Did I understand that right?
Yeah, so actually what the Perseverance rover is doing is actually collecting samples and storing them in titanium tubes, and they are actually meant to be brought back. Obviously, they're doing also, as we call, on-the-spot research. We call it in situ research, where instruments immediately look at the texture and the minerals and how rocks and soil samples are characterized. And so you can actually find evidence for life, but it is very important that many of those samples are collected, and they are laying now on Mars, and there should be a mission, in hopefully around 2030, which is bringing them back. And then we will actually know for sure.
And what would it be? What would you find that you'd be able to say, definitely, that was a living organism? When
you bring it, you have a limited number of instruments when you are going with the space missions. Also, those instruments are not as powerful as in our Earth laboratories and not that high resolution because of many reasons, how you build instruments for space, weight, power, and so on. So when you come into Earth laboratory, you can look for everything. You can look for microbial remnants, so remnants of microbes. You can look at organic molecules. You can look at carbon clusters. You can look at minerals, and you can do isotopic measurements. You can do so much which gives you a much, much stronger indication if there is or was life on Mars.
Stepping back from it, why is it, to you personally, why is it important to do that research?
Well, I think when I talk to society at large about our solar system, and I think it is curiosity. I think we are all interested about the question, or in the answers to the question: are we alone in the universe? And also, where do we actually come from? And I think many answers lay in the exploration of our solar system. And that's why we have a lot of different missions. And right now is really a super exciting era, because there have never been so many missions into the solar system or in the planning phase, and looking at many, many different objects. We had just 2 launches last week. The recent space missions have shown very, very interesting findings, and people are interested in that, and they like these new results about our solar system, and also eventually, if there is life somewhere else. I think it is very interesting for them. I think we are all here in order to explore the universe.
I can see you're excited about just the amount of the missions being launched. What has changed? I mean, what's changed during your career that now is the exciting time? Why is this all happening now?
Well, I think the space sector has evolved in an extremely fast pace. Also because we don't have only space agencies, we have many stakeholders, we have commercial actors, we have now more than 80 space agencies all over the world. So even emerging nations are very interested in space. So the space sector has developed enormously and rapidly in the last, I would say, 1 to 2 decades. And that also increases the number of missions and increases the number of technology and science which are produced. And that's why it is a really exciting area. Certainly, it is much about space for Earth. So all the more than 10,000 satellites in orbit, which are really vital in order for our daily life on Earth. But also when you look at space exploration, that feeds also into space exploration because new technologies are developed and we have many, many missions and we have more findings which give us ideas about new missions. And so it is a very exciting era and we need also a lot of young people entering the field. We have actually, not enough STEM students, and we need a lot of young people in the space sector. There are a lot of jobs.
What should people be studying then to get into this? You say STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. What would you advise people to do?
Well, I would like to say that apart from space exploration, when you look at the entire space sector, we are missing so many high qualified people, and not only in the STEM subjects, because the space sector actually feeds into all the other economies. And so we need people which have a background also sometimes in energy research, in disaster management, and we need lawyers and also people from social sciences. And so, but there are many jobs available in the space sector. And of course, we need a lot of STEM because of the engineering and space is a hard environment. You have to develop really difficult technologies in order to survive there. So there are many jobs available and I think young people don't even know that. So it's a secure career if you come to the space sector.
All careers are being disrupted by artificial intelligence though. And you mentioned lawyers. The job of a lawyer is already changing now. I wonder how artificial intelligence is being deployed in the work you do or that you see colleagues do, or how might it be?
Well, there are hundreds of examples, but I will just focus on 2. Of course, in space exploration, it is really crucial concerning the autonomy and operations. We are going into a deep space environment. Communication is a problem. You need a lot of autonomy. You need a lot of robotics for all those space missions which are planned. But also, I think most in topic, when you look at the topic of space for Earth, it is about data. We have an enormous amount of data coming down from the satellites, and we need to more or less process them very fast and bring them to the customer. And for that, you need machine learning techniques and many things. So that this is something which is really changing, the field also in our field in space. This is absolutely clear.
You mentioned there are so many space agencies now. All right, did you said 80? Is that right?
Yeah, more than 80 years.
How do you see international cooperation now? I think in the days of the Apollo missions, it was the West versus the Soviet Union. That's not a simple case anymore. But there are geopolitical rivalries. I'm wondering, do you see international cooperation working well? Are there things that could work better?
International cooperation has always been really an essential element, in the progress of the entire space sector. And also coming from the scientific point of view, scientists work globally together, since centuries. And international cooperation was always really very strong in the development, of the space sector. In particular, even in the Cold War, international organizations like the International Astronautical Federation or mine Committee on Space Research were created in order to foster the international dialogue. We have more and more space agencies because we have a lot of also emerging nations which are interested. and seeing that as capacity building for their country. And we have quite a number of nations which are able to have launch capabilities and also satellites in orbit. So that is really, really increasing. So international cooperation will be vital really for the future. And when you look at the example of the International Space Station, more than 20 years, of, working and living on the space station, more than 100 countries have performed, I think, more than 3,000 or by now probably 4,000 experiments. And that has really fed into global sciences in many different subjects, physics and health and so on. Obviously, right now we are a little bit in a situation where there are geopolitical tensions. Still, I have to say, I just come from the International Astronautical Federation Congress, where 62 space nations were sitting in one room discussing the future. And also when you come to the United Nations, space committees, you have more than 100 nations, working together. So you have some kind of a duopoly when you look at the moon right now. You have the Artemis Program from NASA, ESA, and other partners. And actually now, I think 45 international partners signed the Artemis Accord. You have the International Research Station from China and Russia with also many partners. This is some kind of a competition, but that has always happened in space. So we will see how that develops. Obviously, there are drawbacks, but you can also see that on the International Space Station, we still have astronauts, cosmonauts from all regions of the world working together peacefully. So I think space has been always a little bit above political problems and has tried to cooperate. And I hope it is continuing like that, and also that the World Economic Forum can actually really contribute to that.
Pascale Ehrenfreund, who's president of the Committee on Space Research. Nikolai, Mars, does that excite you? It's kind of a schoolboys in the 1950s who are loving this idea of Mars, and suddenly it's back as a thing that a lot of people are talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, Robin, you're right. It's back. I think it's not just 1950s. I think there's excitement's been there for the last 10, 15 years. There was some ideas that are, maybe not all have come to pass, of being able to send people already by now to Mars on a one-way ticket. And I've spoken to some of those people who were signing up and were extremely excited. Mars is the most studied planet in our solar system besides Earth. We have a number of missions that have made it to the orbit of Mars, a number of satellites that are flying around Mars, taking pictures and trying to understand information about its atmosphere. We have a number of rovers that have made it on Mars. Some are still active. We've even had, up until now, I think it's coming to the end of its life, a drone. That's incredible. There's been a drone flying on Mars, taking measurements also, but importantly, pictures, understanding how the Martian atmosphere functions. I think we're still far away from getting there with humans. Those robotic missions are already giving us a lot of information. Probably the exciting thing will be to actually have humans there. There will be just so much more we can be able to do right there with humans. Try to understand, try to dig under the atmosphere and analyze the samples right away. And I think it's going to be such a monumental event for everybody on planet Earth when we'll be able to actually step foot on Mars.
In your lifetime?
I think so. I'm pretty excited about that. I think it's maybe not going to be as soon as some of the official mission dates put it for 2030s. It probably would be late 2030s, but again, we never know. But definitely in our lifetime.
Nikolai Khlystov, thanks for joining us on Radio Davos.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Robin.
Nikolai Khlystov is lead space technology at the World Economic Forum. You also heard Alexander MacDonald, chief economist at NASA, and Pascale Ehrenfreund, president of the Committee on Space Research. Find out more about the work of the World Economic Forum on Space at the websites of the Centre for the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the Global Future Council on the Future of Space. Links in the show notes. And for other forum podcasts on space, including one where we link up to an astronaut on the International Space Station, search within the Radio Davos back catalogue wherever you're listening to this, or at wef.ch/podcasts. And if you enjoy Radio Davos, please could you do me a tiny favour favour and leave us a rating or a quick review on your podcast app of choice. To discuss any podcasts, head to the World Economic Forum Podcast Club on Facebook. This episode of Radio Davos was written and presented by me, Robin Pomeroy, with studio production by Taz Kelleher. We'll be back soon, but for now, thanks to you for listening and goodbye.